Hello and welcome. My name is Tom. This is the Enthusiasm Project Season 6, Episode 2. And would you believe it that in addition to audio, we also have a video version of today's episode. I'll be playing a bunch of video clips, but if you're listening to the audio-only version, it'll be okay because you'll hear the audio from the clips. And of course, I'll put links to everything in the show notes so that way you can check out the full versions of stuff if you want to. But if you want to see everything in its full glory, in addition to my beautiful face, then you can check out the video version by becoming a YouTube channel member or a Patreon supporter. So, lots of stuff to go over today. Before diving into that, a couple updates, a couple new things. If you're wondering which microphone I'm on the Shure SM7B today, because it's been a while since I've used this one and I wanted to bring it back out. I love the Shure SM7B. Of course, I've got my bright blue windscreen from reporterstore.com. Still don't have any association with them, but that is like the number one question that I get is where do you get the colored windscreens from? Oh, also, if you're watching the video version, I recently ordered... Last season, I talked about my giant TV camera that I bought, which is this giant Sony TV camera, and it came with a microphone on it, but it didn't have a windscreen, so I bought a blue windscreen for my giant ENG camera from Reporter Store, which is cool because now the super professional camera has a super pro blue windscreen on it, which looks ridiculous. But I think Reporter Store, maybe they I don't know. I feel like people must have said Tom told me to buy a windscreen here, because they sent me something that they said was experimental, or came with a little note that said experimental gift, and it was this. Which is I'll try to describe it as best I can. It's an SM7B windscreen, but it is shiny gold sparkle, I guess, is the best way to put it. It's very glamorous. If I pop it on the microphone right now, there we go. I look and sound awesome. I'll just, you know what? I'm just going to keep this one on here, I guess, for the rest of today because it's very ridiculous. I actually love how insane it is. I'm not a gold guy. I'm more of a silver sparkly guy, if anything. I always wanted a silver sparkly guitar when I was a kid, but this is quite ostentatious. But it's so ridiculous. I love it, and it does leave little gold flakes everywhere. So all that glitters is gold. Anyway, the thing I wanted to start off with today is an update to something we talked about last week, which was the Canon R5C, which there's sort of two updates for that. One is something that makes me feel super good for being on point, and the other is just something I wanted to make sure to address prior to that, which is I've had a few people send me messages saying I'm getting the R5C, I'm super excited about it, and I was kind of critical last week in some of its shortcomings and things. And I want to be clear that, as I said last week, you cannot buy a bad camera these days. So the R5C is an amazing camera, and I'm sure you'll have a ton of fun with it. And especially if you're buying it because it suits your workflow and you need it for your specific workflow, I'm sure that you'll love it. And I would love to hear your experience with it. So if you get it and you use it for a bit, I would love to know what you think and how you feel about it. So please definitely let me know. Just because I was critical of some things does not mean you shouldn't buy the camera or it's bad. My main criticism was actually a bit less on the camera itself and more on Canon as a company, just because I felt that, or I have felt for a while, that they aren't prioritizing or serving their video-focused customers as good as they could be, especially with their mirrorless offerings. And I found something that I think is really interesting, so I wanted to share this with you today, actually. There's a YouTube channel called CineD. He's been around for a long time, digital cinema tech resource, and he does all kinds of camera videos, but he did an interview with Canon about the R5C. So one of the things that Canon does when it comes to their marketing, oftentimes I say Canon sucks at marketing, and they do, but one thing they do that I think is kind of cool is when they release big new updates in cameras and stuff, they kind of send a few of their people out to just do video interviews. And it seems like they're pretty open to different questions because he asks during this interview some he asks the question. It's not like just a promotional thing. Like he actually asks questions that you would have as a customer. Why this? Why not that? Like, and I appreciate that a lot. I think I'm inhaling gold flakes from this microphone. That probably won't be super great. And I like that. I like that Canon does that. And the people who do the interviews, there's usually like the same couple people that I've seen pop up on these different interviews. They seem to do a really good job. And obviously they know what they're talking about. And the thing that I like about the people that Canon sends out is it seems like they really, really like cameras. Like they're just camera nerds. They're into it. And that's really fun. You know, I love when the people who work on these kinds of products and stuff have fun with it and are nerds about them. So that's something that I really, really love. So anyway, I'll put a link to the full interview. It's long. It's 40 minutes long. So, you know, if you want to listen to the whole thing and get everything, you know, hear for yourself and decide for yourself, I'll let you do that. But there are 2 clips for the interview that I want to play for you. I'm not going to really introduce them first or give you my opinion first. I want you to hear it, and then we can discuss afterwards. So the first one is the question of who is this camera aimed at? Like, who is this camera for? And here is the Canon representative's response of who the R5C is aimed at.
Actually, who is this camera for? Whom are you targeting with this camera?
So that's a great question. So up until now, Canon has been dedicated to releasing both our Cinema EOS range of cameras as well as our EOS R system range of cameras, with Cinema EOS being tailored for professional filmmaking and EOS R system for professional photography. But we realized that there's a new wave of content creators out there who are receiving more and more demands from their clients. One moment they might be shooting a corporate video, then they might be asked to take some still portrait photos, or maybe they're at a wedding and they're doing the videography, but there's a few moments where they need to get high resolution stills. So we decided to create this camera because it's incredibly versatile and it gives them the tool they need to have a camera that quickly adapts to their ever-changing requirements.
We will touch more on that a bit later.
Okay, so that was the answer on who the camera is aimed for. I don't know about you, but I actually think that that's a great answer. I think that is a very realistic thing. He's showing that they understand the use case of these cameras and the people who are using them. He definitely addresses the issue of, like, we have been segmenting things for a long time. You have the cinema series and then the R series or the non-cinema series cameras. And now we're trying to do something that's more versatile and capable of doing both equally well. And I mean, from everything I've seen, like, I haven't used the R5C, so I can't say this for sure, but everything I've seen, it is a very capable video camera and a very capable photo camera. So I don't think it's failing in any of those regards. There's just a few oddities, like we talked about last week. And I think the next clip I'm going to play shows that. So I wanted to play that clip because it shows me that, like, that they do get it. They understand what they're up against. But this next clip it's the why a micro HDMI connection. And that was one of my biggest complaints about the camera is you're now calling it a cinema series camera and you put a micro HDMI port in it. And last week I talked about that there's no good reason for that. I didn't think that there's a good reason for that in a cinema series camera. Even in the Sony a7 IV is a mid-range mirrorless photo video hybrid camera. It has full HDMI. Like, come on. There's no reason a giant camera like the R5C couldn't have full HDMI. There's no reason that a camera like the R3 shouldn't. And my theory was that I bet Canon is trying to use as many of the same parts as possible across their cameras as a cost-cutting measure. And so it's not about micro HDMI being the best for the R5C. It's about it being the most cost-effective because they can use the same circuit boards, the same, whatever panels, cards, whatever you want to call them, that they're using in the R5. And I would even bet it's the exact same ones that are in the R3, which is why that giant camera also has micro HDMI. Here is the official answer from Canon on that question. If I can push the button.
Another sore point with the camera, and again, this is a feedback that we're getting from our audience, is the micro HDMI in this camera. Which, of course, I hope you can understand why, especially if the camera is capable of outputting through the HDMI an external signal to an Atomos Ninja 5 Plus. Why did you choose to equip the camera with such a small, fragile connector?
So that's a great question. And of course, I can completely understand why people would prefer full-size HDMI here. But I think you also need to kind of appreciate that this camera, it is an EOS R5. It still has the same body shape. It has more depth. And it's actually still accepted by cages and accessories that were originally designed for the EOS R5 you can still use with this camera. And it shares a lot of the same parts as the original EOS R5, which as Canon, as a manufacturer, we can focus on the things that we want to add. We want to add a new multifunction accessory chute. We want to add a time code. But at the same time, the terminals on the side are exactly the same. So we're adding to an existing design. And if we could go back and change these components, of course, having a full HDMI would have been really beneficial. But we understand that filmmakers do want security with their HDMI cable. So we have included inside the box a cable protector. And what that does is it screws onto the side of the camera. And that will protect both your USB-C and your micro HDMI cable. If somebody was to pull it on set, it would protect the port and it would protect the cable itself.
Okay, I couldn't stop laughing during this, honestly. I wanted to just play it and let you form your opinion, but now that I've heard this several times, oh man, I know that the Canon rep had to be prepared for this question. And obviously, some of the other questions asked during this interview are like, why is there no HK50? Talk about the anamorphic and de-squeezing stuff. They spend a lot of time talking about IBIS and RAW. So like all those things are discussed. And I'm sure he knew that micro HDMI had to come up. But I feel like there are fewer better examples of somebody just dropping the ball on a question. And it's not even that he dropped the ball. He was sort of put in a situation where it's like, this is a really sucky question to answer. But I'm actually going to replay it because there's so many points that I want to address here. So let's just start with the first part.
Another sore point with the camera, and again, this is the feedback that we're getting from our audience, is the micro HDMI in this camera. Which, of course...
Wait, I just love the he knows it's coming, and now he has to deal with the question.
I hope you can understand why, especially if the camera is capable of outputting through the HDMI an external signal to an Atomos Ninja 5 Plus. Why did you choose to equip the camera with such a small, fragile connector?
So that's a great question. And of course, I can completely understand why people would prefer full-size HDMI here.
Yes, it is a great question, and people would prefer full-size HDMI because it is a cinema series camera. Sorry, it's just, I feel bad for the guy, but also...
But I think you also need to kind of appreciate that this camera, it is an EOS R5.
Exactly. That's the problem. So why doesn't the camera have full-size HDMI? Well, you have to understand that this camera, it's a camera. Yes. Moving on.
It still has the same body shape. It has more depth. And it's actually still accepted by cages and accessories that were originally designed for the EOS R5.
So you're telling me that I'm going to spend... I don't even remember how much this camera costs. $4,500, $4,600 on this camera. But my main concern is going to be being able to use the $130 cage that I bought for my R5 that I may or may not actually even have. Let's go ahead and not use that as a reason. If I'm somebody who's gonna, even if I have an R5 that's caged out and everything, and I was gonna spend $4,600 on the R5C, buying a new cage that accommodates full-size HDMI, I would be completely fine with. And I think most people would too. That's not negatively affect the design of this very expensive camera to accommodate inexpensive third-party accessories that someone might have. It's just a bad answer.
You can still use with this camera. and it shares a lot of the same parts as the original EOS R.
There it is. There it is. That's the reason. That's the actual reason. They're just reusing the same parts, which is fine. Like from a manufacturing standpoint, as I talked about last week, that makes perfect sense. But from a standpoint of what is best for your customers, no. Video-centric people, cinema series people, no, you're not better serving them. You're saving your bottom line and you're serving them. And the camera, as I talked about last week, I think is overpriced because the only reason it is at that price point is because they didn't want to eat into the sales of the R5. If they were similarly priced, it would be too confusing. So they just had to bump it up like $600 just cause, basically.
5, which as Canon, as a manufacturer, we can focus on the things that we want to add. We want to add
like adding full-size HDMI to a cinema camera,
a new multi-function accessory shoot. We want to add a time code, but at the same time, the terminals on the side are exactly the same.
Again, that's the problem.
So we're adding to an existing design. And if we could go back and change these components, of course, having a full HDMI would have been really beneficial.
If we could go back and change this, you are the company that manufactures. Who else could do it? You're literally the only one that could go back and change it because you are the company that makes the thing. Who else is... Geez, I know it's a thing we made. If we could go back and make it different, geez, we sure would. Yes, you had 2 years. You had 2 years to make it different. No, I'm sorry. That's the funniest answer. If we could go back and if somebody could find a way to fix this thing, you're the ones that actually manufacture the thing.
But we understand that filmmakers do want security.
Very much so, yes.
HDMI cable. So we have included inside the box a cable protector.
Okay, and then he talks about cable protectors, which have always the EOS R comes with a cable protector. It's a little plastic thing that screws on the side, so then you can run your like HDMI and your USB-C cables through it, and it's great because it does. If the cable gets pulled, it protects. It protects the cable from getting pulled out of the camera, so that's good. But if it does get pulled, it also prevents the camera's ports from getting damaged, which is very important. That has nothing to do with micro HDMI. That's just a thing that cameras come with a lot of the time, regardless of their connector size. That's not a reason why the thing should have or shouldn't have HDMI. But anyway, I'll be sure to link to that full interview in the show notes, so if you want to watch the rest, and if you have questions and things. And I feel bad just pausing and laughing, but it's like Canon dug themselves into this hole, and the answers to that question to me just sort of confirmed everything that I was already kind of suspecting, and a lot of stuff that I had talked about last week. It was just confirmed right there. And the guy who's representing the multi-billion-dollar corporation at this point in time, he's doing the best that he can to answer the questions in an honest way that's also not going to be bad for the company. So he has to kind of spin it. I get that. He's in a very tough spot, which you could see it as soon as the interviewer was like, why micro HDMI? He's like, yeah, that is a really good question. We understand that people want their camera, they kind of set him up to be in that position, and he did the best that he could. And I think he did, he did a great job explaining stuff, but it just, some of the answers are this is where you just that's the answer. You shouldn't have to cover it up. Let's put it that way. If you're the company and you had 2 years to work on a product, you shouldn't even have to ask this question, because you could say one of the things that we noticed from the R5 was that people who were into video really wanted full-size HDMI because it was more secure, it was more reliable, and it worked better with all their external recorders and monitors. So we made sure when we made the R5C to include full-size HDMI, so that way it supported our filmmaker and video users as best as possible. That's what he should have been able to say, instead of trying to just cover up, which comes down to, we used the same parts because it was cheaper. Anyway, that is my R5C update. I just thought it was funny because I found that I don't know, like a day after recording the last episode, where I was hypothesizing that I think it was because they were just trying to save money, and then he kind of confirmed it, and I just felt so vindicated. I was like, yes, I'm not crazy, or at least not crazy for that reason. So anyway, I just wanted to share that as an update because I felt vindicated, but also did want to confirm the R5C as a camera it's awesome, has shortcomings, as all cameras have some kind of shortcomings. So if you're psyched about the R5C, if you're getting the R5C, be excited about it, like use it, have fun with it. It's got to be a fantastic camera. I'm just trying to be a little critical of Canon, the company, as someone who was with them for 15 years as a user and really, really, really wanted them to succeed, but just saw them kind of stumble when it came to supporting their video users, which is infinitely more frustrating given the fact that they're the ones who kind of really did kick off the DSLR video revolution. I know they weren't necessarily the very, very first ones to have video in a DSLR, but they, the 5D Mark II was really the one that like changed everything. And then they followed that up with like, here's the T2i that has like its crop sensor, but otherwise it has the same video functionality as this pro level, full frame camera over here. And they just, then they just hit it out of the park for a few years with the 7D, the 60D, all this great stuff, putting autofocus in video. Like really everybody had a Canon DSLR to shoot video with. And then it was just like, they just kind of stopped serving people in that way. And I don't know. And it's weird. So that's my criticism there. We're going to shift gears so fast it's going to give you whiplash right now. The main topic that I actually wanted to address today, 20 minutes later, is actually about Nickelodeon, the network. And I watched a documentary that came out a couple of years ago. I watched it recently. I had never heard about it. It's on Hulu. It's called The Orange Years. I'll play you the trailer and then we can kind of talk about it. So if you're listening, you'll hear the audio. If you're watching, you'll see the trailer in my little YouTube window here.
Nickelodeon, if you want to know about it, it's a kid-owned environment.
It didn't feel like the version of what an adult was telling a kid to watch. It felt like really what kids were into.
I don't know.
Kids can smell from 1,000 miles away when they're being sold a bunch of crap.
If it was a tiny bit naughty, kids would really appreciate that and feel that it was real and it was really for them.
You can't do that on TV.
No one really knew if it was going to end up being successful.
We were the anti-Disney. We were the anti-Saturday morning.
We wanted less acting and we wanted more normal kids.
How come everybody draws babies as these beautiful ones? When they first come out, heads are kind of weird looking, kind of funny looking, and that's why the Rugrats were drawn like they were.
The inmates were very much running the asylum back then. It was way easier to slip stuff in.
They trusted us. I mean, the stuff we got away with was insane.
There's something about just making a show that is just about laughing, it's about having fun, and it's about just being silly.
When we all got together, we knew there was something magical.
To have that diversity in the show. It gave a lot of hope to a lot of kids coming from different walks of life saying like, well, I can do this too.
Mothers were going to work for the first time, divorce rates were high, kids were either coming home alone or in after-school programs. They needed a place where they could just be kids. They want a childhood, let's give it to them.
So there's all those crazy things that happen that, nobody knows about.
All right, so again, it's called The Orange Years. It's available on Hulu. I think it's probably available other places too. Totally recommend it. Like it's so good. If you're in your 30s or your 40s, I think it's especially gonna hit you in like the nostalgic side of things pretty intensely. But I wanted to watch this because I was definitely a kid who like grew up watching, Nickelodeon. I was born in 1985, so I was like at the perfect age in like the late 80s, early 90s. When Nickelodeon was starting to become like the kids' TV network. And I loved it. The thing that I remember most that I actually forgot about and the documentary helped me remember was the feeling of ownership that I had over that network and that my friends had because, I forget how many channels we had. Actually, I remember this. Nickelodeon was channel 32 and we had 36 channels. And channel 36 was the Spanish channel, so I couldn't understand it, even though I'd still watch it sometimes, because everybody needs a little Sábado Gigante in their lives every once in a while. Channels 23, 24, 25 were like HBO and Showtime and like the paid channels, so we didn't have those. Channel 28 was MTV. I think 33 was the Weather Channel. Channel 6 was Public Access. Channel 1 obviously wasn't anything. I still remember like our channel lineup. My point being is that we had we really had 35 channels, but maybe only, for me, if you take out like the ones that didn't show anything I'd ever be interested in at all as a kid, there would be maybe 10 channels that might have something on sometimes. And of those, there was only one that was like, that really felt like it was, like it got me, like it really understood me, and that was Nickelodeon. And my friends felt the same way, like the impact that it had, because it didn't feel, they kind of mentioned it in this trailer and they talk about it in the documentary, it didn't feel like a kid's show where you're being talked down to, where it's like, okay, you dumb kid, like we're an adult, we're going to tell you something here, or we're going to make an issue really black and white. Some of it didn't even seem like they cared about like educating. Obviously, you know, they did, and they prioritized that at points, but some of it was like literally just entertainment, which felt so good and was just so fun to have, like a goofy show. It wasn't trying to be an after school special. It wasn't a very special episode. It wasn't any of that. It was just like, hey, watch this show right here. And there's a nice variety of shows. So like a kid like me is going to gravitate towards Doug a lot, or Rocko's Modern Life or whatever. And then I had other friends who were all into like, I mean, I liked Ren and Stimpy, but not nearly as much as like Doug and Rocco and Rugrats and stuff. But there was kind of something for every sensibility. Ren and Stimpy, the thing that I liked the most was whenever like it'd be at like a friend's house, or we'd be having like a sleepover and a bunch of us would be watching it like at night. The show was just 10 times funnier. Like they'd show something and then they'd show the super gross extreme close-up of it, and it was always I don't know. When you're 11 years old, it's the funniest thing in the world. So I that feeling though of like being excited about something. I remember they would do stuff. They would have like contests, or they would do, you know, I don't know, they'd run a thing that was like Earth Day or recycling times or whatever. And then I remember like my friends and I going outside and like getting cans and smashing cans and like collecting them in a bag because like the TV told us to. It's exactly what everyone always says TV does. Like it's going to make kids do things. But it was like, I don't know, it just seemed cool. Like, oh yeah, we should do it. It made it accessible. It made it fun. You know, the idea of getting to go on one of those game shows and get covered in slime, or like climb through the hidden temple, or do Double Dare or something, was always like so exciting and so fun. And even though we had nothing to do, obviously, with the programming on the network, we weren't connected with it in any way. We were just viewers. We're just kids watching it. But it really, really, really felt like it was our thing, and it was for us. And in the 90s especially, there was that whole thing of like, you know, kids taking over the adults, like adults are stupid and kids should be in charge. And like that whole that was a very like constant theme throughout movies and TV shows. I don't know if it still is, but it really was in the mid 90s. And it just sort of like, it was fun to just have kids treated like people. And then I remember they show it so many times throughout the documentary, but the Florida studios, the Nickelodeon studios at Universal Florida, which had the big slime fountain, and, you know, the building had this crazy paint scheme and all this stuff. And I remember that feeling like it was like, I don't know, like the promised land of, you just saw it so much on TV and you saw so many things there. Even though they had a lot of their production spread to New York and LA and all this stuff, it was like that studio in Florida was the place to go. I never got to go there. I've never even been to Florida, but so I know there's like a bunch of people who listen to this from Florida. I've never been to your state. But I've seen recently, the thing that kind of kicked this off was I saw a before and after photo of the Nickelodeon studios, which now it had been abandoned for several years. Like it just wasn't used for anything. And so it got painted over in just like a boring, bland, like corporate color scheme, and all like the sign got taken down. The slime fountain is gone. So if you want to see it, there's just like a drain in the concrete where it used to be, and that's all that remains. It's very much like a visual metaphor of your childhood disappearing and the world becoming less fun and interesting. And there's actually a great episode. If you go to the Bright Sun Films YouTube channel, I did a whole history on the studio, and it's really interesting. It did become like the Blue Man Group theater for Universal for several years, and then just recently that shut down because I guess they haven't been performing because of the pandemic. And so now the future is kind of unknown. It'd be awesome if they like just made it like a Nickelodeon. I don't know what Nickelodeon does now. So this is the thing is, watching this, it made me remember how much I loved Nickelodeon. I don't know what they do as a network or how they function now. I have a feeling it's probably not the same as it was then, because essentially the story is they were trying to do this thing and no one was really paying attention to what they were doing. It was like, we need a show. Can you just put out a show? A lot of people, like, there's a segment in the documentary where they're working on the TV show Hey Dude, like the Dude Ranch show. And they're explaining, like, for a lot of people, it was the first time ever working on a show and they didn't know what they were doing. Like, they literally didn't know how lights worked and how to use cameras. Like, it was a lot of very new people to the industry and to the world, and they just figured it out. And because they just sort of jumped in and had to figure it out, they did make a lot of mistakes, but they also sort of like ended up developing this very unique style and this very unique perspective. And the imperfections are part of what made it so perfect and what made it so like realistic in its own way. It's really fantastic. And somebody who comes out as a hero in the documentary is Geraldine Laybourne, who was one of the heads of Nickelodeon when it really like kicked off and became the Nickelodeon that we know now. And there's a clip of her in the trailer that I just played. I'll play it again, actually. She's got all kinds of interviews and stuff, and she's all over the documentary. She's a pretty amazing person after I looked a little more, but here's her clip from the trailer that I just showed.
Mothers were going to work for the first time, divorce rates were high, kids were either coming home alone or in after-school programs. They needed a place where they could just be kids. They want a childhood, let's give it to them.
So there's all those crazy things that happen.
That's the sentiment that she kind of, like, that's an understanding of what kids are going to. Like, they do need... I've always been a big fan of Mr. Rogers because I think that what he's done is amazing and his approach was amazing, and he spent so much time like working to make sure that things were as beneficial as possible for the children who are watching the show, and worked with child development people. And I'm sure Nickelodeon did too, but not to that extent. A lot of it really was, it did feel like, you know, here's just a place where you can kind of like, it's your place to hang out and you're a kid. And if something happened, remember they had like the news segments and stuff. So like, they would talk about controversial things or upsetting things or important things that were happening, but so it wasn't like you're being talked down to, but it was like, my parents are talking about this, you know, crazy thing that I don't understand. Oh, here's like Nick News that's going to break it down in a way that like why I should care, how it affects me. Should I worry about it? Should I not worry about it? The fact that like pretty much all of the main executives when Nickelodeon went through like its golden era or its orange era, were mostly women, I think is super cool and progressive. A lot of their shows, a lot of their, like, there's so much diversity amongst everybody who worked there, and the people on the shows and the people you saw, that it was really, really ahead of its time. And it was just super exciting to see. I don't think TV networks are run that way anymore. And Geraldine Laybourne, she ended up leaving in the late 90s, like right around the time that SpongeBob started, because that was when they were getting a lot of approaches to do merchandising and that kind of stuff. And she just wasn't into that, basically. And so she left. She ended up going to ABC for a couple years, which was Disney. And then she started the Oxygen Network, which I never watched because Oxygen was, it was the network for women. And I guess I was legally not allowed to watch it. But it's pretty cool, actually. Like, looking into it, a lot of stuff I didn't know. It even premiered on February 2nd, so it was 0202, maybe of 2002, 020202. It's like Oxygen Day, which I thought was pretty cool. And again, kind of progressive and interesting. And she seems to have had a career of like seeking out groups that needed something to connect to, had nothing to connect to, and then giving them something to connect to. And this is all pre-YouTube, obviously, and pre-high-speed internet and all that kind of stuff. So she's pretty amazing. And I sort of went down the rabbit hole of like reading her biography a little bit, and really liked her and her approach and the way that they empowered people and trusted people to be creative when they're being creative. And the thing about it is, it really, I can't watch that documentary and see people doing something creative and doing something fun and experiment and not think how that relates to YouTube and like content creation in today's world, because I don't think a TV network is going to run that way. I don't think I wouldn't think that Nickelodeon is still run that way, but I do think that a lot of YouTube channels can be run that way. And what I've seen so much is people trying to take their YouTube channel and turn it into broadcast television. Turn it in. It's like you got out of prison and you're just trying to, now you got out of prison, you built a nice house for yourself, and now you're trying to like model it after the prison. Like, don't do that. You don't need to. You can do your own thing. I was even listening to an interview the other day from Christian Jacobs, who's the Bat Commander, the lead singer of the Aquabats, my favorite band ever. And also one of the creators of Yo Gabba Gabba, super popular TV show that was on Nick Jr. And, you know, they ran on Nick Jr. from 2008 to 2015, I believe. And now they're coming back on Apple TV, which is super cool. But he was talking about that they started that show. They basically like put second mortgages on their houses to produce a pilot in 2006. And they put this pilot on YouTube and started sending it around. And that's what got traction. And then they made the show. And the interview, they kind of talk about like, why did the show end? Why this, why that? And kind of explain like, well, you know, network things, like basically the network had licensed this show, so they didn't own it, but the licensed show is now more successful than a lot of shows that they did own. And so they could either buy it, but we didn't want to sell it, or they had to kind of like end the show so that way their owned property would be more successful. And then they were pushing for, you know, more and more, because Yo Gabba Gabba as a kid's show always had a thing like, you know, Elijah Wood is in the first episode, Tony Hawk is there. There's all these, Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo teaches an art segment. Like there's all these celebrities there, but they're not necessarily, it's not like The Simpsons where it's like, oh my gosh, Mel Gibson, what? Like it's where they like shoehorn a celebrity. It was always pretty organic. And I guess by the end, the network was trying to like have them, hey, you know, this person is popular right now. You should put them on the show. And what he said in the interview was that they started the show really in 2006. YouTube was not what it is now. So using YouTube as the platform to run something on isn't what you would do now. But he was even saying like, if we were doing that now, like we could have just done it on YouTube, kept it on YouTube, and it would still be going. Like we'd still be making episodes because we wouldn't have to deal with the network. And I think that's, you know, that really does kind of show how things have changed in such a short amount of time. But the thing that was interesting about Nickelodeon to me too as a kid is thinking back, like that idea again of ownership over something, where I didn't even like everything that was on the network, but I still like felt like it was my network. There were some shows I wasn't into or whatever, but it wasn't like, I feel like in the world of YouTube we fall into this, and part of it is of course algorithms and whatever, but it's almost like you think people have to like every single thing that's on a channel, otherwise it's a failure. So someone's, you know, if the right people are subscribing to your channel, they must like everything that you make, otherwise it's a failure. Whereas when I think of my favorite, you know, source of entertainment as a kid, Nickelodeon, there was a bunch of stuff on there I didn't like, a bunch of shows I wasn't into, and it didn't lower my opinion of the network at all. It was still like, yeah, this is my favorite thing. They're just not playing something I'm into right now, so I'll check back in later. And I wonder, myself included, if people who run YouTube channels and even viewers of YouTube channels, if people had that approach, would it change things where it's not like, oh, this channel made a video I didn't like, unsubscribe, they're terrible, they used to be good, I missed 2017 channel, that kind of thing. And if instead it was just like, oh, this one's not for me, but the next one could be, okay, cool. Like, you know, I'm here for the long haul and the broad spectrum, not each. And I don't know if that makes sense. I don't even know how to articulate it into words, but it was such an interesting, I guess there weren't other options. It wasn't like there was 10 million other Nickelodeons that I could turn to. It was just the one. So it was like, it was what I got. Whereas in YouTube, you're like, oh, this person made a video I don't like, I will unsubscribe and go find one of an infinite number of other channels. But I don't know. It was just sort of like interesting to me. And it got me thinking about when you're making something like a YouTube channel, are there ways that you can help people who watch it and subscribe to it feel that same sense of like ownership over it without you having to sacrifice, you know, your creative side? Like it's your channel, you're making your stuff, but can you connect with people in such a way that they really feel like they're a part of it and it connects with them really deeply? I don't have the answer to that, but it's a really interesting thought. And it's one of those things that I kind of thought that if I put out there, maybe other people would ruminate on it a while and come up with ideas, or it could help shift their perspective. If you watch the documentary from the perspective of like a content creator, I think you're going to get all kinds of good ideas. They do talk about merchandising at one point. If you remember like all the weird Nickelodeon toys that came out that looked, they were super weird looking, and there was stuff like Gak and Slime and all this stuff. Literally what they did was they went to the toy manufacturing companies and they basically just said, show us all the stuff that all the other companies rejected. Because I guess what happens is if you have a company like Mattel, they do just make toys, but they also have like a whole lab, like a chemistry lab, where they're figuring out how stuff works together, how to make new things, how to do this. And then they make something weird and they try to figure out like, what is this? How does this fit into the world of something? You know, can we put this weird gel in somebody's arms and then you stretch his arms out and that's Stretch Armstrong? Like that kind of stuff. And they come up with all these weird things, and then there's no real application for it because other toy companies and other networks and other, you know, whatevers aren't interested in it. And so Nickelodeon said, show us everything that doesn't work. And that's where they had stuff like Slime or Gak, or I don't know, Floam. All those weird things like kind of came from that. We're like, we have this stuff. We don't know what it is, but maybe you want it. And they're like, yeah, let's spend extra time putting Gak into a container that's molded into the shape of like a splat, which is weird and also more expensive to make that container. Hey, Canon, remember the cheap thing with the micro HDMI? And then Nickelodeon actually spent more money just to make a container look like a splat. And the reason they did that was not just because it was identifiable, but it was because when you put the stuff back in the container, you couldn't stop it from making a farting sound. That was how you had to put it away. And they did that on purpose. I love that. That's like, I don't know. That's just, and even the friggin' studio that we talked about, I'll see if I can, you know, pull up a picture here real quick. But the Nickelodeon Studios looks like a completely insane building in its heyday. Now it's just a sad like corporate building. You would never even recognize what it was. But back in the day, well, here I'll just do a. You can see my Google image results. Back in the day, it was this big, bright, colorful, crazy patterns. It's everything that's not. It's sort of like in today's like ultra polished, minimal world. It's sort of the exact opposite of that. And then here's kind of what it looks like today. It's just sort of boring. And I feel like so many things did that. Especially if you're, again, in your 30s and 40s, and maybe even beyond, but I can only like kind of speak for myself. I just feel like as a kid and growing up, it was such an okay thing for stuff to be messy and stuff to be crazy and all over the place. And you do, of course, refine your taste and trends change and things evolve over time. But it feels like things now like need to be so uniform that it's boring and that it stifles creativity. And I don't know if that's because that's how things have to be, if that's what people like, or if it's just because, you know, monkey see, monkey do. Like if I'm watching a YouTube channel and the person is, you know, sitting in a studio that looks a certain way, then I'm going to set up my studio and my lighting and my background or whatever to look like theirs. And then someone's going to see my video and they're going to set up theirs to look like that. And it's, I don't know, it's just, it taps into this part of me that's like struggling with this, because Heather and I have talked about this where we will go into like model homes sometimes just for fun. And, you know, a model home is decorated beautifully. Like it's impeccable. Everything, most of the time. Sometimes there's super weird choices being made, but most of the time they're gorgeous. They're like, everything matches, everything's coordinated. You know, I've had friends who had like classic Palm Springs homes, because that's kind of where I live, that are like literally like pure white inside, white furniture, white floors, white ceilings, white walls, and maybe like, you know, one bright orange bowl on a counter or something, like one pop of color. And I actually like I couldn't live there because it wouldn't work for me, but it's like, this actually looks super cool. You know, I see stuff, I see very minimal, I see very muted color palette. It's all great. Like there's no right or wrong. And I get drawn to that stuff. And so there have been so many times where I think like, yeah, that's what I need to just do, clean and simple and this, that, and the other thing. But my impulse is the exact opposite. If the room I'm sitting in right now is a crazy hodgepodge of a mess, it's everything that honestly, like if someone were saying, hey, okay, you're going to set up like a video studio, don't do everything that's in here. This is the opposite of everything you should do. But that's what works for me. And sometimes things aren't perfect and sometimes things are a little sloppy. And that was, I talked about Casey Neistat being a big motivating factor for being able to start YouTube. And that's because he kind of did show imperfection is okay. It's not that you want to be sloppy. It's not that you want things to be low quality, but it's more about like you want to do something. So instead of waiting until you have this absolutely perfect thing done, just do the thing and then refine it and evolve it over time. And if that means people are going to see something that has sort of a mistake, if that means you're going to build something that's slightly imperfect, who cares? Like it really doesn't matter. If it becomes an issue, you can change it later on. But for the most part, like it's going to be the thing that gets you started. And when you surround yourself, going back to the Nickelodeon studio that has the insane colors and everything all over the place, you can create something. I'm not saying that you need to have insane colors to be good or creative, but I'm saying like you can throw your ideas and your personality and your creativity into something and then make something that is so uniquely yours that it really, really does stand out. I guess a good example in the opposite direction might be Becky and Chris and their YouTube channel, because if you want to talk about, muted colors and things, everything's gray, black, white, sometimes green. Those are kind of the things that are popping up there, but it looks so good and it suits the personality really well and it suits the vibe of the channel really well. So it's not that like I'm saying you need to have wacky patterns and color schemes in your videos or in your background or whatever, but it's suiting what works. Like when Nickelodeon was this insane idea of, it is a network being run by adults, obviously, but it's for kids. And as a kid watching it, you really felt like it was your network. And then you saw the studio of it and it looked insane. It looked like something you would doodle on like the back of a homework assignment. There was a real connection there. And I think finding ways to build that connection or to put that part of yourself into something so that whatever you're making can connect with people in that way, I think is really important, and definitely something that I feel like we've kind of lost. Like, I don't know, nothing's allowed to be ugly anymore. Nothing's allowed to be like imperfect, it feels like. And I just feel like, maybe we've lost something in that quest for perfection over there. And I don't know. I mean, ultimately, I think you should watch the documentary. It's super good and you'll really, really love it. And this also ties into something I was watching. I saw an interview with Marquez Brownlee on Colin and Samir's podcast, which was really, really good. I should probably link to that too in the show notes because it's long and Marquez talks so much about his studio and his philosophy and how they do things. And the interview is great because it's the second time he's been on their podcast. They don't have to do like the origin story. They kind of just jump into like the mechanics. And he talks so much about their approach to making content, why he's someone. So I guess if you want to take this to a different angle, he's someone who actively seeks out to have things looking and sounding as good and as clean and polished and high quality as absolutely possible. And that's kind of, that's why he's going to spend $250,000 on a robot arm that only gets used once in a while. That's why he was shooting on 8K cameras in 2018 or whatever it might be, is because of this insane thing that's pushing you there. And it's like, I feel like you can still have that same connection, not necessarily because you're someone who's going to buy robot arms and super expensive cinema cameras, but because you might identify with someone who's so into this stuff that you want to like keep pushing it to the extreme. And even if somebody does say, well, it's just a YouTube video, use your phone, you're like, no, I'm going for like overkill, quote unquote, here. That I think that's one of the things. I don't care about cell phones, and half of his videos are about cell phones, but I'll watch them all because I'm interested in how he's approaching it. I feel like creatively motivated and inspired after watching it, and it's it's sort of tied in just with that whole, I don't know, just that whole philosophy there. It's like, it's messy and it's weird and it's fun and it's part of the process, and it's something you can actually connect with. When things are too perfect and too polished, it's like, it's really hard. It's just hard to connect with them. It's hard to feel like it's organic and authentic. And obviously that's something that we've talked about a lot in past episodes, but it really, really stood out to me with that documentary. So I can't recommend that enough. It's really good. It's really, really well done. And I know that weird stuff has happened with Nickelodeon executives. We'll just say that in the past, and they don't really dive into that in the documentary. So obviously I'm not condoning or endorsing or trying to ignore those things, but that's just not really what I'm focusing on here. And the era of the network and the studio that I'm focusing on was before those things were happening anyway. So I'm kind of like focused on this very specific, like, golden era of nostalgia from my childhood and what made that so special, and remembering the connection that I felt to this thing that I was watching regularly, and then thinking, now as an adult who makes stuff, how could I make something that people have some version of that connection and that feeling, that ownership of? How can I do that? And I don't know. I don't have the answer, but that's something that I'm kind of ruminating on and thinking about and working on. And I hope to kind of make progress on that front in the future. So we did a little bit of whiplash there, going from Canon to Nickelodeon. But you know what? I didn't plan on the good example of like making the GAC container, spending the extra money to make the GAC containers specifically a weird shape, so that way it made farting sounds when you put the slime inside. And that's a $7 toy that you would buy at the store. And then Canon's over there like, I know it's a $4,600 camera, but gee, if we could change it, that would be really cool if someone could do that. Come on, Canon. Anyway, if you have thoughts about any of this stuff, as always, I love to hear them. Feel free to reach out. If you're getting an R5C, I would love to know about it. I would love to see the R5C. And if you have anything that you want to share on a future episode, you can always email me, tom@enthusiasmproject.com. So with that being said, thank you for listening. Thank you for spending your time with me. And I hope you have a safe, happy, healthy, fun rest of your week. And I will see you next time. I could not play the outro the way that I intended. Okay, I will see you next time.